I'm Carol. I'm 67 years old, widowed, and I've lived in the same little house on the edge of Eugene, Oregon, for over 30 years. I raised my son here, buried my husband here, and learned the difference between being quiet and being weak here. So when my daughter-in-law Rachel showed up last Tuesday morning with a notary and a man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as a transition consultant, I didn't panic. Rachel was all silk blouse and tight-lipped sympathy, talking slowly, like I'd somehow forgotten how English works. She smiled and said it was time we discussed my next chapter. According to her, they'd already found a lovely assisted living facility with friendly staff and stimulating activities, and all I had to do was sign a few papers. I looked at the documents, neat stacks of legal jargon pretending to be kindness. I looked at the notary, already flipping pages, and I looked at Rachel, whose eyes didn't blink once as she explained how this move was for my safety. I smiled. Then I stood up and said we'd need to make a quick stop on the way, the police station, because they were waiting for the copies of these exact documents I'd sent over yesterday. The room went quiet, like the moment before a thunderclap. The consultant shifted in his chair. Rachel's smile twitched. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just kept smiling the way you do when you know the snake in your garden is about to get caught trying to eat the wrong mouse. You might be wondering how it got to this point. How a woman who used to bake cookies for the PTA ended up warning off her daughter-in-law with the threat of criminal charges. It didn't happen overnight. It started with a wedding, a lie, and a favor that turned into a trap. But before I take you back, let me make something very clear. I'm not crazy. I'm not confused. I'm not a frail little woman who needs to be tucked away like a dusty book no one wants to read. I'm old, that's all. And age doesn't mean surrender. So buckle up, because this story doesn't start with weakness. It starts with betrayal. And it ends with something Rachel never expected. A woman like me, fighting back. The day Josh married Rachel was warm and bright, one of those late summer afternoons that feels borrowed from a postcard. The church was decorated with pale blue hydrangeas, the same flowers I had in my wedding bouquet 35 years ago. I sat quietly in the second row, not quite family enough for the front, but not far enough back to disappear. I remember how radiant Rachel looked, how Josh's eyes lit up when she walked down the aisle. And I remember thinking maybe this would be the start of something good. They were expecting a baby, and part of me hoped that becoming a grandmother would knit us together, give me a place in their new life. But little signs kept catching in my throat like a pebble in a shoe. My name wasn't on the invitation. I wasn't mentioned in the program. The seating chart had me next to a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, far from the parents of the groom. When I asked Rachel about it later, she laughed and said it was a simple oversight, but the way her smile didn't reach her eyes told me otherwise. I told myself not to read into it. Told myself I was being sensitive, overthinking, that this was her day, not mine. But still, something in me felt like a guest in my own son's life. And deep down, I knew that day wasn't just a celebration. It was a quiet goodbye to the space I used to hold. When Rachel stood up to give her wedding toast, the room quieted like a scene in a movie. She looked beautiful. Flawless, really, glowing in her silk gown with one hand resting gently on her belly. I expected something short, something sweet, maybe a thank you to her parents or a kind word about Josh. Instead, she turned toward me and smiled, the kind of smile that hides sharp edges. She thanked me for my help, for being so generous, for moving in with them while they prepared for the baby and adjusted to married life. And then she said it. She's practically part of the furniture now. Laughter rippled through the room, nervous and unsure, like no one wanted to be rude but didn't know what to do with that line. My stomach twisted. I smiled too, the polite kind, the kind you wear when you're trying not to fall apart in public. I could feel eyes glancing toward me, some with pity, some with confusion, like I was a cautionary tale no one wanted to admit they understood. Rachel kept talking, all about family and sacrifice, and how inspiring it was to have someone who knew how to give so much. But every word landed like a slap dressed up in lace. It wasn't a tribute. It was a warning. I wasn't just unwanted. I was already being framed as a burden, right there, under a crystal chandelier, in front of everyone I loved. When Josh and Rachel told me they'd found their dream house, I didn't hesitate. I pulled together everything I had: savings, a small inheritance, even a little tucked away emergency fund, and gave them $18,000 for the down payment. It wasn't a gift, not exactly, but I didn't ask for interest or paperwork because it was my son and his growing family, and that's what mothers do. At first, Rachel was all gratitude and warmth. She called me generous, said I was the kind of mother she hoped to become one day. She even insisted I stay with them for a while, just until the nursery was ready and they were fully settled in. But slowly, the tone shifted. Rachel started making little comments about how the stairs in my old apartment seemed dangerous, how I'd misplaced my keys 3 times in 1 week. She said she worried about me living alone, that maybe I didn't realize how forgetful I'd become. She said it gently, always with a smile, always sounding like she cared. Then came the reminders about how I was lucky to be living with them, how not every mother gets that kind of support from their children. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. I'd helped buy the house, helped furnish it, even helped cover the new washer and dryer, and now I was being recast as someone they were carrying. It was subtle. It was slow. But it was deliberate. My generosity had become a weapon, and somehow, I was the one being framed as the burden. It was a Thursday morning, just after 9, and I was still in my robe making coffee when Rachel walked into the kitchen with a man in a blazer and a briefcase. She acted like it was nothing, like this was some casual chat between friends. Her tone was cheerful, too cheerful, as she introduced him as someone from a firm that helps families with elder transitions. I remember holding my mug a little tighter, my fingers suddenly cold around the ceramic. She said they'd been thinking a lot about what was best for me, and that this was the next logical step. Then the man opened his folder and slid a stack of papers across the table like he was handing me a magazine subscription. Rachel smiled and said they'd already put down a deposit. Not, "We were thinking about it." Not, "Let's talk." "It's done." I stared at the form's documents that would sign over my share of the house, grant her power of attorney, and commit me to a facility I'd never seen. That's when the air shifted. My shock gave way to something sharper. I set my mug down carefully, looked her right in the eye, and asked why Josh wasn't here for this. She didn't flinch, said he found legal stuff stressful and thought it was better if she handled it. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about love, it wasn't about my safety. It was a quiet execution of my independence, and they expected me to go quietly. They didn't know me at all. After they left that morning, papers unsigned and tension thick in the air, I went straight to my bedroom closet. I pulled down an old shoebox from the top shelf. The kind no one ever checks because it looks too ordinary to matter. Inside it, carefully wrapped in a faded scarf, was the folder I hoped I'd never have to use. I had every document, every receipt, every email printed and dated. The $18,000 wire transfer confirmation. The original house deed shows my name as co-owner. And the power of attorney that my own lawyer, yes, my lawyer had drafted months ago. That little clause Rachel never saw? It clearly stated that the document would be void if I were found to be of sound mind by 2 licensed physicians. Not Rachel, not some notary she dragged in. Actual doctors. Most people don't know this. But I used to work as a clerk in a probate office. I've seen what happens when families turn into wolves over property. I never wanted to believe mine could do the same. But I wasn't stupid. I kept every backup, every file. I even had a copy of the email Rachel sent to Josh, where she called me a ticking liability. She thought deleting it made it disappear. I thought ahead and forwarded it to myself the moment I saw it on his iPad. That folder was my shield, my insurance, my proof that I hadn't imagined the shift in tone, the gaslighting, the plan. They thought I'd roll over because I was old. What they didn't count on was that I've lived through too much to leave quietly. I didn't cry when I read that email again. I smiled, because now I knew I wasn't the one about to lose everything. They were. I asked them to come back the next morning. Rachel didn't even try to hide her satisfaction, thinking I'd spent the night crying or folding under pressure. But I greeted them at the table with coffee, a calm smile, and that folder placed neatly in front of me like a loaded weapon. The notary sat down first, shuffling his clipboard, trying to move things along. I asked if we could quickly review some documents of my own before we signed anything. Rachel rolled her eyes, but I opened the folder and laid everything out slowly: the deed, the power of attorney, with the conditional clause. And then, right on top, the printed email. The subject line, in bold, the Carol situation. I watched the notary read it. His face drained like someone had just handed him a confession. He stuttered something about needing clarification, legal context, maybe stepping outside for a call. Rachel leaned forward, her voice tight, asking where I got that email. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She knew, and I watched the mask she wore every day start to slip at the edges. She said I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting, that the email didn't mean what it sounded like. But her voice cracked halfway through, and the notary had already stood up and started packing his things. He wasn't going to be part of this anymore. He didn't want his name on a disaster. I leaned back, folded my hands, and asked if they'd still like to visit the police station. I wasn't loud. I wasn't angry. I was just done pretending not to see what was right in front of me. And in that moment, for the first time in months, I didn't feel old or invisible. I felt sharp. I felt ready. I felt like the one holding the pen. Packing my things didn't take long. I had come into that house with only a few boxes, and I left with even less. But what I carried out was heavier than anything I put in a suitcase. It was the weight of disappointment, of betrayal, and of finally knowing that staying would only break me further. The apartment I moved into wasn't big. It had beige carpet, a tiny balcony, and a view of the senior center's garden that made me smile every morning. For the first time in months, I could breathe. No one hovered. No one questioned where I was going or what I remembered. I could leave dishes in the sink if I wanted. I could read late into the night and sleep with the window open. 2 weeks after I left, Josh called. His voice cracked like it hadn't done since he was 12. He said he was sorry, that he'd let Rachel do the thinking for both of them, that he hadn't seen it what she was doing, how she spoke about me when I wasn't in the room. He said he'd found the second draft of the power of attorney on her laptop, dated before I even moved in. Rachel left him not long after that. No dramatic goodbye, just a note on the fridge and an empty drawer. Once she realized there was nothing left to inherit, nothing she could control, she vanished. And strangely, that was when everything started to feel quiet again. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel sad. Just light. Like I had been holding my breath and finally let it go. I had lost the house I helped pay for. I had lost time. I had lost the version of family I thought would always be there. But I had gained myself again. I sat on the balcony that night with a cup of tea, listening to the wind move through the trees. I wasn't the same woman who moved in with them. That version of me had been chipped away. But what was left, what remained, was someone stronger. Someone unafraid to live on her own terms. Sometimes, you don't win by holding on. You win by walking away. The first time I held her, she was swaddled in a blanket covered in tiny bluebirds. She smelled like milk and sleep. And when Josh whispered her full name to me, Emma Carroll, I felt something inside me break open and heal all at once. My name, passed down not as a reminder of pain, but as a chance to rewrite the meaning of it. She looked nothing like Rachel. Her features were soft and new, untouched by whatever shadows her mother had carried. I didn't think about the woman who tried to erase me. I thought about the girl in my arms who might grow up learning that strength doesn't have to be cruel, and kindness doesn't mean surrender. I had written her a letter weeks before she was born. I sealed it and placed it in a box with her name on it. It's for her 18th birthday. And in it, I tell her the truth, not about scandal or inheritance, but about love. I write about how real love never comes with strings, how it lifts you rather than traps you. I write about the power of saying no, and how protecting your boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole. Holding her, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt hope. Hope that this child might grow up freer than the ones who came before her, that she might never have to choose between being loved and being herself. I kissed her forehead and whispered something only she could hear. Not a warning, a promise, that the women in our family could still change the story. Starting now. She showed up one afternoon without calling first. I opened the door, and there stood Evelyn, Rachel's mother, holding a manila envelope as if it weighed more than it should. Her face looked older than I remembered, not from age, but from carrying something she'd been trying to set down for a long time. She didn't make excuses. She said Rachel had done this before, targeted older women with charm and false concern. She said she had tried to protect her, to believe she would change. Then she handed me the envelope and said it was $18,000, the amount I gave, the amount her daughter took. I didn't count it. I just sat down and listened. Evelyn said she couldn't undo the harm, but she could at least return what never should have been stolen. Her voice shook when she said sorry. Not just for Rachel, but for waiting so long to see clearly. I told her I didn't hate her daughter. I just couldn't let her rewrite my story. After she left, I sat with that envelope in my lap. It didn't feel like revenge. It didn't feel like justice in the legal sense. But it felt like someone choosing to do the right thing, even when it was messy and late. And sometimes, that's what healing looks like. Not a courtroom, not a dramatic ending. Just one human being quietly standing up and saying, "This never should have happened." And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.